A reunion of three Adams generations. Father John, a founder of the United States and its second president. Son John Quincy, returning after distinguished years abroad as minister to Prussia, Russia, to the Netherlands, and Great Britain. And grandsons, George, John, and Charles Francis.
George?
And how was the voyage, John? How many days at sea?
50. The weather was excellent on the whole. The decanter's empty, son. Would you mind?
Not at all, sir.
4 feet 4. Is that all?
Well, think of it this way, Charles. It's 52 inches.
Is it really, George? Did you hear that? 52 inches. That's so little. You couldn't catch a flea.
Gentlemen, the occasion calls for a toast. Perhaps several toasts. First, I give you our host and hostess, my mother and father, who in my heart will always be President and First Lady of these United States.
Well, thank you, Thomas. But enough of yesterday. Tonight the occasion is the return, may I say, the triumphant return of my eldest son. Gentlemen, John Quincy Adams.
John Quincy Adams, former Minister Plenipotentiary to Britain, present Secretary of State,
And future President of the United States.
George. George. You'll oblige me by going to your room. I had every right to be angry, George. Our homecoming should have been a happy occasion. Instead, I was humiliated.
George said what he said because he's proud of you, Father.
Well, quiet pride, family pride is one thing. Boastfulness another. Now, let's hope the incident stays within the family circle. A rumor that I have my cap set for the presidency would be intolerable and false.
But, Father, it was George who said it. You didn't.
Charles, when you jumped from that tree, I watched your shadow. I had a fancy that the shadow was me. Me, 40 years ago. I swam here, too. I jumped from that same tree. While you were in the air, you and the shadow were separate. Separate in time for a fraction of a second. Then you sped together, converged, became one as you plunged into the water. All of us, my father, I, his son, you, my sons, we are all each other's shadows, separate in time, but part of a whole. We are, therefore, accountable to each other for our conduct. If one of us plays the braggart, it hurts us all.
Well, I have apologized, Father.
I hope the lesson endures. We'll all be separated soon. Harvard, the Boston Latin School, your mother, Charles, and I in Washington. I expect the best from you in your studies and the highest standards of conduct in the other aspects of your lives. I know I ask a lot. But remember, I ask nothing of you that I do not demand of myself.
Old age, son, narrows a man's choices. For myself, I have considered various alternatives. Should I become a fierce old man, or perhaps a gentle old man? I have chosen a third alternative, the role of wise old man.
A wise choice, Father.
Yes, and one which implies spreading a little wisdom. Are you prepared to take a little well-intentioned advice?
Of course, sir.
Well, on a personal note, I have been observing the boys these past few weeks. George in particular. They seem subdued. I miss the crises of boyhood, the spontaneity. Life seems to sit on them more heavily than it should.
You feel I'm too heavy-handed with them, don't you?
I do.
Is it just an opinion, or can you cite anything specific?
And I hark back to the evening of your arrival. George and his toast.
Well, that was unforgivable.
Was it? Let me speak as counsel for the defense, with George as my client. When he toasted your future presidency, he only voiced the possibility that was in the mind of every man in the room. Secretaryship of State is an acknowledged stepping stone to the presidency. In the future, you may be considered a candidate, Johnny, whether you wish to be or not. I therefore submit that George said only what every man in the room might have said. Momentarily embarrassing, perhaps, but hardly unforgivable.
Perhaps I was too severe with him.
Which brings the wise old man to his second bit of advice. As a possible candidate, your every move will be watched by your potential rivals. Now, temper your judgments in that knowledge. Study your every move.
I can make only one promise. To fulfill my duties as Secretary of State as best I can. My business is to serve the country in the station assigned me, not to intrigue for further advancement, particularly since I do not and will never seek the presidency.
Well, perhaps you will. In any case, good luck, Mr. Secretary.
General Andrew Jackson, hero of the War of 1812, pursued marauding Indians into Spanish Florida. Spain demanded return of the territory. Great Britain learned that Jackson had executed 2 British citizens, Arbuthnot and Armbrister, for aiding the Indians. A volatile English public talked of war.
It's an outrage! An outrage, Mr. President, which can't have the direst consequences unless this cabinet takes immediate action.
Well, what immediate action do you suggest, Mr. Calhoun?
General Jackson's orders, issued by me as Secretary of War, have been flagrantly disobeyed. Now, thus this government can and should disavow Jackson. We should repudiate his seizure of the Floridas and his execution of the 2 British subjects and make his conduct the subject of an investigation by a military tribunal.
A court-martial?
Exactly.
And are you of the same opinion, Mr. Crawford?
Mr. President, I fear war with Spain. It would ruin our trade and be disastrous to our economy. As Secretary of the Treasury, it is my duty to advise, as Mr. Calhoun has suggested, that Jackson be punished and the Floridas be returned to Spain.
Now, gentlemen, please be seated. I have reservations. But in the main, I agree. Mr. Adams, I had the feeling you might rise to dissent.
On the contrary, Mr. President, I rise to add another voice to the general agreement. I refer to the voice of the Spanish minister, Luis de Onís. As you know, I have been meeting with him almost daily. The Spanish minister, too, suggests that General Jackson should be disciplined for flagrant disobedience to orders, and that the Floridas be restored to Spain.
And your opinion, Mr. Adams?
I think that General Jackson's actions were justified.
Justified
By the misconduct and the negligence of the Spanish officers in Florida. I think that the argument that Jackson disobeyed his orders is an argument of dubious merit. Moreover, gentlemen, if the question is dubious, it is better to err on the side of vigor than weakness, on the side of our own officer who has rendered the most eminent services to this nation, than on the side of our bitterest enemies.
Minister of His Most Catholic Majesty, the King of Spain, Don Luis de Onís.
Ah, Don Luis.
Congratulations, my friend.
Congratulations.
Rumor says, just rumor, that single-handed you can sway the opinion of your cabinet and your government.
Indeed. Is the Spanish minister regularly informed of what goes on in cabinet meetings?
I am my own intelligence network, at great strain to myself. I attend a lot of dinner parties.
Oh, surely, Don Luis, you don't rely on gossip.
To a certain extent. One thing is clear. In this new situation, it is you with whom I must deal, and you alone.
Mm-hmm.
That distresses me. It distresses me because we are somewhat alike, you and I. Stubborn men, hard to deal with.
You requested this meeting, Don Luis.
I did. I am preparing a report from Madrid on the status of our negotiations for a treaty. In view of the extreme tensions brought on by General Jackson's outrageous invasion, in view of the new circumstances, I felt it necessary to clarify your latest position on the western boundary.
This morning? Well, let me see. Let's say that I am on the Rio Grande.
In that case, sir, I am on the Mississippi.
That doesn't seem so far apart.
I hate to walk it.
But this was your line as of our last discussion.
Correct. That is where I stand. And you, sir? And pray, what are your plans from there on?
Thence straight to the Pacific Ocean.
The United States liberated the Atlantic coast from the British Empire. You now propose that Spain cede you half the Pacific coast. That coast has been Spain since Juan de Fuca discovered it. Do you really expect that in return for a treaty we give you the Floridas, all this territory and that as well?
Your country needs the treaty, Don Luis. By agreeing to my proposal, you will have retained Texas and gain consideration in respect to those South American possessions now in revolt against your king.
No, Mr. Adams. I'll recommend negotiation ceased until Florida is restored to Spanish authority. Compensation is made and lawful punishment handed out to General Jackson.
Madrid Madrid might not welcome the delay, Don Luis. She may want to cede the Floridas, while my country still admits she has the Floridas to cede.
Again, no. The impact of General Jackson's reckless adventure has not yet been felt in Europe. When the shock is felt, powerful forces will be unleashed. Forces powerful enough to jolt even you, my friend, into a more reasonable position. Good day, Mr. Adams.
Don Luis, are you counting on England? Good evening, Mrs. Hawkins.
Good evening, sir.
Where's Mrs. Adams?
In the drawing room, sir. Master Charles is up in his room studying his lessons. And your little niece.
Mrs. Adams's niece.
Whatever you say, sir. Anyway, Mary Catherine's back from her visit, and she's brought a little friend with her as companion. And they're up in her room studying their lessons.
A commendably thorough report, Mrs. Hawkins. Add to it that I'm in my study, studying my lessons.
Mary Catherine, come in. Mary Catherine? Can you imagine? Charles lured me in here and then tried to kiss me. Charles, you are wicked.
It was also found that information was afforded by Arbuthnot to the enemy about the strength and movement of the American army. Did you hear that, madam?
Yes.
This, of course, is the key to the treaty with Spain, to prove Arbuthnot and Ambrister guilty. You do understand?
No.
Let me explain. Spain knows that we can't back up our treaty demands, not if the British are threatening us with war.
What is not clear is why you must, by dawn, prove guilty two men already proven guilty and already executed.
No, those trials were in formal court. This is written for the court of public opinion, to turn that opinion against Spain and to sway the British public and stop them from clamoring for war because we executed those two.
John, are you aware of the time? I came down to suggest that you come to bed.
I know. The hours I keep are shocking, but you worry too much about my health. No one ever dies from lack of sleep.
Or from loneliness. What can die is a relationship. John, we're becoming strangers who share a house, who share a bed, and still are strangers. Our lives, instead of being intertwined, merely run parallel to each other as though destined never to touch.
I know, Louisa. But the work, it's so important.
No doubt it is. I'll leave you to your defense of General Jackson.
Oh, but this is no defense. I'm on the attack. Let me read you another paragraph. The obligation of Spain to restrain the Indians of Florida from hostilities against the United States is explicit, is positive, is unqualified. If, as the Spanish officers maintain, they could not restrain the Indians because of military weakness rather than will, that may serve in some measure to excuse those officers. But that fact must demonstrate to the Spanish government that it must immediately attend to its territory or cede to the United States that territory which she retains only nominal control.
That will be published?
Spread across half the world.
Will it not be something of a bombshell?
More than a bombshell, my dear. A broadside. Damn it, Bent, I told you no visitors.
Adams, the President of the United States.
Good morning, Mr. Adams.
Unexpected privilege, Mr. President.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to see the old office again. You keep it neater than I did. Mr. Secretary, I have good news. So good that I wanted to bear the tidings myself. It concerns that broadside of yours. A broadside it was. Took down every enemy in sight. Changed public opinion here and in Europe, silenced all our critics in Congress. And then there's this, finally. From Rush in London, by special messenger. You'll have it, no doubt, officially from the British ambassador in a day or two. What it amounts to is this. Lord Castlereagh, with your broadside on his desk, has decided that Britain will not lift a finger to protest Ambrister and Arbuthnot, nor to demand a rebuke of General Jackson.
That is indeed good news.
Is forced to continue at that bargaining table with no expectation of help. I imagine now you can twist her. Mr. Adams, something is wrong. You're not even savoring your triumph.
I have had other news this day. On the personal side.
Huh?
I was just writing my father. My mother, Abigail Adams, is dead.
John, I most acutely share your sorrow. She was a great woman. I will write to your father. Immediately. That line of ours.
Yes, sir?
Suddenly it looks quite real.
Westward, the star of empire takes its way. The words are yours, Mr. Secretary, from a speech you made almost 20 years ago. Congratulations. It's a rare day when a man can be said to have fulfilled his destiny, or at least part of it.
Good day, Mrs. Hawkins.
George.
Madam.
It's wonderful to see you, George.
A little present for you. All the way from Boston. I hope it traveled well.
You hope? What is it?
Damn, I forgot to ask. I had a friend pick it out for me.
George, you're impossible.
Of course. I stopped at the States, paid my respects to Father, bumped into my old friend Freddie, what's his name, and he told me the heiress is playing at the theater. Stopped at the theater, picked up tickets, and here I am. Tonight, I shall take my charming mother out to dinner and to the theater.
Oh.
It's all right. I checked. Tonight, Father will be locked in his study, working.
He only thinks he'll be working, George. We have a dinner tonight, a diplomatic affair.
Oh. All right, I'll take Mrs. Hawkins. No, better still, Charles. Wait, Mary Catherine must be grown up enough by now. Can she go if Mrs. Hawkins acts as our chaperone?
I imagine she'll be delighted to go with you, George.
You are Mary Catherine.
Indeed I am, sir.
What happened to the freckles? The knobby elbows?
They went the way of your warts, George.
News from Kentucky, sir. An attack on your policies, delivered in a speech by your opponent, Mr. Henry Clay.
Mr. Clay represents opposition to this administration. That doesn't make him my opponent.
Sorry, sir. I must have been thinking of him in the other context as your opponent in the future presidential election.
I'm not running for any office, Mr. Bent. Just doing my best to administer the Department of State.
Mr. Clay seems to be calling for some sort of alliance with the newly liberated republics in South America. A force in balance against Spain and her allies.
Leave the material on my desk. I'm even now preparing an address that will reflect on that matter. America has, in the lapse of nearly half a century, and without a single exception, respected the independence of other nations, while maintaining and asserting her own. She well knows that by enlisting under banners other than her own, she would involve herself beyond the power of extrication in wars of interest and ambition and intrigue, which assume the colors and usurp the standards of freedom. John! Anything the matter?
I hadn't expected to see another academic gown for a while. Well, not till I go back to Harvard in the fall.
Oh, well, this is just for a speech next week. Well, how did the term go? What was your class standing?
Just fair. Well, mediocre, I suppose. I'm about 40th in the class.
What are we going to do about it?
I'll do better next term.
40th? Out of 85? I suggest immediate steps. 4 or 5 hours a day on your books, and I'll arrange for a private tutor. Well, as you can see, I'm preparing an address.
Yes, sir.